The Gift of Mary, the story of the Rosary and its transformative power. The heavenly encounter. It was the 13th century, a time marked by wars, uncertainty, and challenges to faith. The hearts of men were divided, and many had turned away from the path of God. In a small monastery in southern France, a young friar named Domingo de Guzmán walked along the paths of prayer, seeking answers. His soul, filled with love for Christ, ardently desired that more people find the comfort and light of the gospel. But Dominic's efforts seemed in vain. Despite his fervor and preaching, many continued to reject the words of salvation. One night, after a long day of preaching, he withdrew to the nearby forest, seeking refuge in the stillness of nature. The sky was clear, the stars shone brightly, and the full moon illuminated his path. There, in that solitary place, Dominic knelt and lifted his prayer to the heavens. Lord, how can I lead others to you? My words no longer reach their hearts. What can I do to bring them back to your love? He cried out with a broken voice. Immediately, a celestial light descended upon him. The figure of a woman, radiant and full of grace, appeared before his eyes. It was the Virgin Mary, wrapped in divine light that seemed to emanate from her very being. Her face shone with peace and love, and her presence filled the air with a deep calm. Dominic, my son, your zeal is noble, but there is something more powerful than your words. Prayer is the means through which souls can be touched and transformed. I bring you a gift from my son, said the Virgin with a smile full of tenderness. The young friar, astonished and humble before such a revelation, listened attentively as Mary explained the purpose of her appearance. The mission begins. The next day, Domingo de Guzmán woke up with a peace he had never experienced before. The vision of the Virgin Mary and her message continued to resonate in his heart. He knew that his life had changed forever. Determined to fulfill the mission that had been entrusted to him, he got up early and began organizing his thoughts. How would he share this divine gift with others? He gathered his fellow friars at the monastery, and with a look full of passion, he told them what had happened the previous night. He spoke of the Virgin, her message, and the Rosary, that powerful prayer that could transform hardened hearts. The friars, surprised and moved by Dominic's sincerity, decided to join him in this new task. Brothers, we hold in our hands something that can change the course of history. It is not just about words, but about a path to peace, to the heart of Christ. We must carry this prayer to every corner of the world, Dominic said with conviction. With this determination, they began to travel from town to town, spreading the news of the Virgin and her gift of prayer. In each place, Dominic taught the people how to pray the Rosary, showing them how, by meditating on the mysteries of Jesus' life, they could draw closer to God and understand his deep love. First, many doubted. The people, tired and skeptical from the turbulent times they lived in, did not understand how simple beads and prayers could have such power. But Dominic, with his unwavering love for God and his fervor, showed them the power of meditation and deep prayer. The first fruits were not immediate, but over time, they began to see changes in those who embraced the Rosary in their lives. One day, while walking through a small village, Dominic and his companions came across a man who seemed to be in great suffering. His face reflected despair, and his eyes, full of sadness, showed no hope. They approached him, and Dominic, with compassion, offered him a bead from the Rosary. Would you like to learn how to pray the Rosary? This prayer can help you find peace and hope in the midst of your trials, he said. The man looked at the bead, uncertain. However, something in Dominic's heart touched his soul, and he accepted. They taught him how to pray, how to meditate on the mysteries of Christ's life, and soon, his face began to brighten. The despair that once enveloped him transformed into a glow of peace and hope. Seeing this, more people from the village approached, and soon the rosary began to spread beyond the confines of the monastery. Souls that had once been distant from God began to experience a profound transformation. The faith of many was renewed, and in every prayer of the rosary, the divine light seemed to touch the hearts of the faithful. I give you a spiritual tool, a powerful weapon for the conversion of hearts, the rosary. It is a simple prayer, but profound, that by meditating on the mysteries of Christ's life, can bring souls closer to God's love. Each bead represents a prayer, and when prayed with faith, people will be touched by divine grace. Dominic, with a heart full of gratitude, accepted the heavenly gift that Mary offered him. He knew that this would be the way to touch souls and strengthen the faith of believers. The Virgin, with one last look full of love, disappeared, leaving him with a heart full of hope and a clear mission: the power of prayer. As the months passed, the devotion to the rosary spread like a river of grace through the towns and cities of Europe. The news of the powerful prayer reached the ears of many, and those who had once been skeptical began to embrace it with faith and reverence. The lives of the faithful began to transform, for by meditating on the mysteries of Christ's life, their hearts were filled with hope, joy, and love. Dominic and his friars continued their mission, traveling tirelessly, bringing the message of the Virgin and the Rosary to every corner where it was welcomed. In every village, in every church, in every corner of the countryside, people gathered to learn how to pray the Rosary. It didn't matter if they were rich or poor, wise or simple peasants. All found comfort in the repetition of those prayers, in the reflection on the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. On one of his journeys, Dominic arrived at a city that had been devastated by a recent war. The violence had left deep scars on the hearts of the inhabitants. Despair had taken hold of everyone, and many had turned away from the faith. When Dominic arrived at the center of the city, he realized the magnitude of the suffering that the war had left behind. The entire town seemed to be immersed in sadness. "This is the moment, brothers," Dominic said to his fellow friars. "The Rosary is what we need to heal this town, ****. They began to gather the people to join in prayer, but the first days were difficult. Many of the inhabitants remained trapped in their pain and resentment, unable to see beyond their suffering. But Domingo did not lose hope. He knew that, although the Rosary might seem like a simple prayer at first, its power lay in faith and persistence. One afternoon, while they were gathering to pray, an old man approached Domingo. His face was marked by the scars of war, and his gaze, although tired, reflected deep sadness. "Brother Domingo," he said in a trembling voice, "I have heard about the Rosary. Many say it can bring comfort, but I don't know if I have the faith to believe. My family was destroyed by the war. How can I pray when everything I have lost seems irreparable?" Domingo looked at the old man with compassion and placed a hand on his shoulder. "What you have lost is painful, but God never abandons us, even in suffering. The Rosary is not only a prayer to ask for help, but a reminder that we are never alone. Jesus walked with us in suffering, and with him we can find peace in the storm. I invite you to pray with me, and you will see how, little by little, God's peace begins to heal what is broken in your heart." The old man, still doubtful, accepted the invitation. They began to pray together, and as they did, the man felt his heart begin to soften. The repetition of the prayers, the meditation on the mysteries, gave him a sense of comfort he had not felt in a long time. As they continued, the other inhabitants joined, and gradually, a glow of hope began to fill the city. The whole town turned to prayer, and as they prayed the Rosary, something wonderful happened. Tensions began to decrease, emotional wounds began to heal, and a spirit of unity began to be reborn. The Rosary had brought to that town the peace they so desperately needed, the miracle of faith. The days passed, and the transformation in the city became even more evident. As the inhabitants continued praying the Rosary, they began to share testimonies of how they felt calmer, closer to God, and more united as a community. The prayer introduced by Domingo and his friars was not only renewing their faith but also healing the wounds of the war. Something profound was happening in the heart of the city. One day, while Domingo was walking through the streets, a young woman hurriedly approached him, her face filled with astonishment. The young woman, named Isabel, had been one of the most skeptical when the Rosary began to be prayed. But something had changed in her. "Brother Domingo, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice trembling. "My mother has been sick for many years. No doctor has been able to help her. She was bedridden, weak, with no hope of recovery. But 3 days ago, after praying the Rosary with my family, something miraculous happened. My mother got out of bed, completely healed, as if she had never been sick." Domingo looked at her with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. Although he had witnessed many miracles throughout his mission, this story touched him deeply. "Isabel, this is the power of prayer. Your mother's faith and yours, united in the Rosary, have allowed God to act. It is not just a prayer to ask for our own problems, but a way to unite with Christ and the Virgin Mary in times of suffering. The Rosary, in its simplicity, carries with it the power to transform lives." The young woman, with tears in her eyes, thanked Domingo and quickly left to share the news with her family. The city, upon hearing about the healing miracle, was filled with renewed fervor. More and more people joined the prayer meetings, hoping that the Rosary would bring them the peace and healing they longed for. As devotion to the Rosary grew, Domingo began to see how it spread beyond the borders of villages and towns. Messages of healing, conversions, and miracles multiplied. It was clear that the Virgin Mary had given a precious gift to humanity, a gift that went far beyond the simple repetition of prayers. The Rosary was a direct link to the heart of Christ, a way to meditate on his life, and through that to come to a deeper relationship with God. During one of his visits to a larger city, Domingo was received by a group of faithful who, after hearing his story and the miracles brought about by the Rosary, asked him to go to the central church to pray there. That night, the church was filled with people of all ages and backgrounds, gathered in one heart to pray and meditate together. Domingo, with humility, began to guide everyone in the Rosary prayer. As they prayed, the atmosphere in the church filled with an indescribable peace. The lights of the candles shone with a special glow, and it seemed that the very sky opened up above them. At that moment, Domingo understood that the Rosary was not just a tool for conversion but a gift of unity, of connection between men and God. The path to unity. As the months passed, devotion to the Rosary continued to grow, transforming those who joined in prayer. The fruits of faith were clear. The cities and towns where the Rosary was prayed experienced a spiritual renaissance. Hearts became more humble, families gathered in prayer, and the tensions that once divided the communities began to fade. Domingo, accompanied by his friars, continued his mission, preaching fervently and teaching the power of the Rosary. In every place they arrived, people received them with open hearts, eager to learn more about this simple yet powerful prayer. However, as his mission expanded, Domingo knew his work was not finished. The Virgin Mary had entrusted him with a task that involved not only teaching a prayer, but also restoring unity among Christians and drawing souls closer to the love of Christ. One day, on one of his travels, Domingo arrived at a small village where two groups of Christians, divided by an ancient dispute, lived in constant conflict. The tensions between them were palpable, and the division was so deep that they didn't even greet each other. Upon hearing about the situation, Domingo decided to take action, knowing that the Rosary had the power to unite even the most hardened hearts. He gathered the leaders of both groups and proposed a solution. "I invite you to join in prayer. You have lived apart for a long time, but the Rosary is a prayer of unity. By meditating on the mysteries of Christ, you will learn to see God's love in one another. I ask you to join us in this prayer and see if the peace of God does not touch your hearts." Although there was resistance at first, Domingo did not give up. With patience and perseverance, he showed them that the Rosary was not just a prayer of petition, but an invitation to recognize God's presence in our lives through the mysteries of His Son. The prayer, when repeated with faith, transformed the heart, opening it to reconciliation and forgiveness. One afternoon, the two groups finally accepted the challenge and gathered in the village square. Domingo, with a soft yet firm voice, guided everyone in praying the Rosary. As the words flowed from his lips, something profound happened. At first, there was tension, but as the prayer continued, the hearts began to soften. The hands that had once been rejected intertwined, and the faces that reflected anger began to shine with the peace of Christ. When they finished praying, a deep silence overtook the place. The two groups, once divided, looked at each other with new understanding. It wasn't just that the prayer had united them. It was God's love, reflected in the meditation of the Rosary's mysteries, that had given them a new perspective, a new sense of fraternity. Domingo, seeing the reconciliation between the brothers, felt a deep gratitude in his heart. He knew that the mission entrusted to him by the Virgin was bearing fruit not only in the conversion of souls, but in the restoration of unity in Christ. That night, the two groups celebrated Mass together, and for the first time in many years, they shared the peace. The community was united again, and the Rosary prayer became the symbol of their reconciliation. Domingo, witnessing this miracle, understood even more the divine purpose of the Rosary, not only to heal individual hearts, but also to heal the wounds of communities. The face of divine love. With the miracle of unity achieved in the village, devotion to the Rosary continued to flourish in the communities. The message of the Virgin Mary and the power of prayer spread like an unquenchable fire. Domingo and his friars, now accompanied by many of the faithful who had learned to pray the Rosary, traveled with renewed fervor, knowing that each prayer offered was one step closer to the restoration of the human heart. One day, while walking through a particularly small village, Domingo felt a strange sense of unease. Something in the air seemed heavy, as if a dark shadow had fallen over the people. Upon reaching the central square, he saw a crowd gathered, but their faces did not reflect peace or hope. Instead, there was an air of despair and fear. Approaching, Domingo saw a young man kneeling on the ground, tears falling from his face. "What's wrong, son?" asked Domingo, approaching the young man. The boy looked up, but his eyes reflected a deep emptiness, a sadness so great it seemed impossible to heal. "Father Domingo, I've lost my mother. My sister is gravely ill, and my father is caught in an endless war. I don't know how to go on living. I have no hope left. How can I pray when everything I love is slipping away before my eyes?" said the young man, sobbing. Domingo knelt beside him without haste. He knew that the pain of this young man was real, and that words alone would not be enough to heal his broken soul, but something deeper could restore him. Gently, he offered him a rosary bead. "Son, life is painful, and sometimes it seems like we are alone in the midst of suffering. But the rosary is a way to remember that Christ himself went through pain, and in his suffering, we find the comfort our souls need. Jesus does not leave us in the dark, even when everything seems lost. In praying, we remember his love and his sacrifice, and through him, we can find peace." The young man looked at the bead, hesitant at first, but something in Domingo's words touched him. He decided to join the friar and began to pray with him. At first, the words came slowly, as if his heart was too broken to fully surrender. But as they prayed together, something began to change. As he meditated on the mysteries of Jesus' life, the young man experienced a sense of calm he had not felt in a long time. He remembered how Christ had suffered for the love of humanity, and something inside him began to heal. In the following days, the young man began to attend the prayer meetings that Domingo organized in the village. Each time he prayed the Rosary, he felt his heart soften and the sadness that had once enveloped him begin to fade. Gradually, his faith was restored, and the light of hope returned to his life. One afternoon, after weeks of prayer, the young man approached Domingo with a smile. His face no longer reflected the despair it once had. Instead, there was a glow of peace in his eyes. "Father Domingo, I want to thank you. The Rosary has changed my life. My mother is still in heaven, but now I can see her departure with a heart full of hope. My sister is improving, and my father, though still in the war, I feel that I am not alone. I know Christ is with me, and through this Rosary, He has given me the comfort I so needed." Domingo, with eyes full of gratitude, smiled at him. "Son, you have not been alone for a moment. The love of Christ is always with you, and now you have found a new strength in the Rosary, a path to Him. This is what the Virgin Mary has given us: the ability to meditate on the suffering and glory of Christ, and to find hope in the midst of trials, the path of hope." The story of the young man who had found comfort in the Rosary spread quickly throughout the village. Many, seeing his transformation, began to join the daily prayers. In the squares, in the houses, even in the fields, the people began to pray the Rosary as a community united by a common purpose: to heal their hearts and draw closer to God. Domingo, observing this spiritual revival, felt a deep gratitude for the grace he had received in being the bearer of the Rosary. Every day he saw more fruits of faith in those he had taught. People who had once lived in despair now walked with a new light in their eyes, a light that could only come from God. One day, while resting with his group of friars in a secluded monastery, Domingo received an urgent letter from a bishop in a distant city. The letter spoke of a grave situation. Plague had arrived in the city, and the streets were filled with death and despair. The bishop asked Domingo to travel there to help the souls in chaos, and especially to teach them the Rosary as a means of finding comfort and hope. Domingo, without hesitation, gathered his friars and began the long journey to the city ravaged by the plague. He knew the situation was dire, but he trusted that the Rosary, that prayer which had been so powerful in other places, would also bring hope to those who were suffering. Upon arriving in the city, what he found was even more desolate than he had imagined. The streets were empty, save for the sick and those caring for those on the brink of death. The air was thick with a sense of despair. The bishop, who was waiting for him at the central church, explained that conventional prayers seemed insufficient to stop the plague, and many in the city had given up. "Friar Domingo," said the bishop, his voice breaking, "we have done everything we can, but the people have no hope left. Death is among us, and we do not know what else to do." Domingo looked around and, with the certainty that only faith could provide, spoke calmly. "Hope is not found in the absence of death, but in the presence of Christ, who guides us through it. I bring you a gift from the Virgin, the Rosary. This prayer is not just for asking for healing of the body, but for healing the soul and bringing us closer to God. I will teach you how to pray it, and in doing so we will find peace, even though the disease continues." With the bishop's permission, Domingo began gathering the few faithful who still remained in the city. he invited them to join in prayer. The initial responses were timid. Many feared that, in the midst of such despair, prayer could offer them nothing but empty words. But Domingo, with his unwavering love and certainty in God's power, patiently guided them in praying the Rosary. As the prayers became more frequent, something began to happen. Despite the plague, an inexplicable peace began to fill the hearts of the faithful. Those who prayed the Rosary with faith felt God's presence in such a tangible way that, even amid sickness and death, they experienced comfort. The prayers of the believers rose like incense to the sky, and the people of the city began to see the disease not as an end, but as a step toward eternal peace in Christ. Over the course of several weeks, those who joined the Rosary began to experience improvements in their emotional and physical states. Although the plague did not immediately disappear, the fear that accompanied it faded, replaced by a renewed hope. Families began to gather in prayer, and the fear of death was replaced by faith in eternal life. One of the most moving testimonies came from a woman who had lost several of her children to the disease. With tears in her eyes, she said to Domingo, "Friar Domingo, the Rosary has given me peace in my heart. Although my children are no longer with me in this life, I feel their presence closer than ever. I know they are with Christ, and that my pain will be healed in him. Thank you for bringing me this gift." Domingo smiled, knowing that the power of the Virgin and her Rosary had made this miracle of faith possible. The echo of the Rosary. The plague finally began to subside in the city, but its legacy endured far beyond the disease. The Rosary, which had been the refuge of those who suffered, had become an indispensable tool for the daily life of the inhabitants. The peace that had been achieved through prayer was not temporary. It had been planted in their hearts, and the souls touched by faith did not want to let it go. Domingo, seeing the fruits of his mission, understood the magnitude of what had begun. The Virgin Mary, by entrusting him with the Rosary, had not only given him a means of prayer, but a way to restore unity among the faithful, strengthen them in their faith, and give them hope for eternal life. Now, in every town and city he passed through, he saw how the Rosary was fulfilling its purpose. In one of his visits to a nearby village, Domingo was welcomed by an elderly man who had been waiting for him for days. The old man, known to all as the sage of the region, had heard of the miracles that accompanied the Rosary prayer and wanted to speak with him. "Friar Domingo," said the old man with a deep voice full of wisdom, "I have lived many years, and I have seen much suffering in this world, but I have never seen anything like this before. I have heard of the wonders the Rosary has brought to this land, and I want to understand more. Tell me, how can a simple prayer have so much power?" Domingo looked at him with affection and replied, "The Rosary prayer is not simple, though its words may be. It is powerful because it connects us with Christ himself, who in his life, death, and resurrection revealed the greatest love that exists. Each of the mysteries of the Rosary invites us to meditate on that love, on Christ's compassion in moments of joy, suffering, and glory. The Rosary is a path of union with God, not only in moments of joy, but especially in moments of pain and despair." The old man, touched by the answer, asked Domingo to guide him in praying the Rosary. Though he was a man of much experience and knowledge, he understood that there was still something deeper to learn: the humility of prayer. "I thank you, Friar Domingo, for showing me this path," said the old man as they began to pray together. The peace of the prayer enveloped them, and both the sage and the friar knew they were touching something eternal. The following weeks witnessed the spread of the Rosary through the surrounding lands. The people, moved by the testimonies of miracles and conversions, began to share the prayer with those who did not yet know it. More and more people gathered in prayer circles, seeking not only personal peace but also unity with their brothers and sisters in faith. Domingo saw how the Rosary transformed into a symbol of hope and restoration. The villages, which had once lived divided by uncertainty and war, now united in prayer. Families reconciled, people forgave each other, and Christ's love spread through each bead of the Rosary. In each soul that found comfort in the prayer, Domingo saw the reflection of God's love. One day, while resting after a long day of travel, Domingo meditated on all that he had experienced. He thought about the transformation he had witnessed in the hearts of the people. From despair to hope, from suffering to comfort, from division to unity. He knew that his mission had not been just preaching, but an invitation to enter the heart of God through the Rosary. This is the gift that the Virgin gave me, not only to me, but to all those who are willing to receive it, Domingo thought in his heart. And with that thought, his soul was filled with peace, the light of eternity. Years passed, and the seed that Domingo had planted began to bear fruit in a way he had not imagined. The Rosary had become an integral part of Christian life, transcending generations, languages, and cultures. Every time he saw a new community gather in prayer, Domingo felt in his heart the confirmation that what had begun as a simple act of obedience to the Virgin Mary had become a transformative force crossing borders. On a trip to a large city, a young friar approached him, eager to share his experience. "Father Domingo, I come from a faraway place. There, the Rosary has not only become a prayer of hope, but it has healed the deepest divisions. People of different races, creeds, and social backgrounds now pray together, seeking peace and unity in Christ. It's amazing. No one thought this would be possible, but the Virgin has shown us the way." Domingo smiled, moved by the young man's story. However, deep within his soul, he felt that his work on earth was nearing its end. The mission that the Virgin Mary had entrusted to him was in full bloom, and he, a simple friar, had been the instrument of God to change the course of many lives. One afternoon, while walking alone in a field near the monastery, Domingo stopped in a clearing and looked up at the sky. The peace he felt in his heart confirmed to him that he had fulfilled what the Lord had asked of him. At that moment, as if the Virgin Mary were near, he remembered all the times that the Mother of God had guided him in his mission, starting from that first encounter in the forest. Every word she had spoken to him resonated in his heart more powerfully than ever. He knew his time on earth was drawing to a close, and although the sadness of parting filled his soul, he felt a peace that only the Lord could give. His life had been a testament to God's grace, and he knew that the Rosary would continue beyond him, bringing light and hope to future generations. That night, surrounded by the friars who had accompanied him in his work, Domingo knelt for the last time. With a serene smile on his face, he began to pray the Rosary, as he had always done. His brothers in faith joined him, knowing that although their leader was departing, his legacy of love, hope, and devotion would never die. When he finished the prayer, Domingo lifted his gaze to the sky, and in a whisper full of love, he said, "Holy Mother, I have done what you asked of me. Now I give you all that I am." At that moment, God's peace enveloped him completely, and his soul ascended to heaven. The Virgin Mary, with her immense maternal love, received him in the arms of her Son, who welcomed him into eternal rest. The legacy of Domingo de Guzmán. The legacy of Domingo de Guzmán endured through the Rosary. His life was a witness to a divine love that would never fade, and the Rosary would continue guiding souls to the heart of Christ, now and forever. After Domingo's departure, his message endured. The Rosary continued its journey through the centuries as a prayer that united Christians in faith and in the love of Christ. In every corner of the world, from the most remote places to the great cities, the faithful continued praying the Rosary, meditating on the mysteries of the life of Jesus, and receiving comfort, peace, and strength. The seed that Domingo had sown grew, multiplied, and flourished, transforming countless lives. In each bead of the Rosary, the echo of his mission resonated, a call to unity, to hope, and to faith in the love of Christ. Throughout the centuries, many other saints and faithful took Domingo's testimony and lived it with joy. The story of the Rosary was woven into the heart of the Church, passing from generation to generation as a sacred treasure. And, at the end of time, when all has passed, the Rosary will remain a beacon of light, guiding souls to eternal glory. Mary's gift, the Rosary, will endure as a reminder that, amid suffering and darkness, the light of Christ never fades. And, forever, the Virgin Mary, our Mother, will continue guiding us on the path of faith, hope, and love.